She is the Assistant Dean for Programs and also chairs the Department of Multimedia Journalism. A veteran journalist and journalism educator, she has been a senior lecturer at Penn State, a Virginius Dabney Distinguished Professor at Virginia Commonwealth, and an adjunct journalism instructor at Howard University. Throughout her career, she has been a reporter, editor, and manager. Her newsroom stops have included the Detroit Free Press, New York Newsday, the Philadelphia Daily News, and the Washington Post. A former national officer for the National Association of Black Journalists, she represents the NABJ on the Accrediting Council for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. So, thank you very much, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to welcome our panelists, Magnus Forsberg, whom you heard upstairs, who is experienced in risk management and security. And if you weren't at lunch, you missed his remarks. We'll go over some of that stuff. So if it's repetitive for some of you, I apologize, but I think it bears repeating. He is project director of the Securing Access to Freedom of Expression program at the International Research and Exchanges Board. And basically his job is to help journalists figure out how to stay safe in dicey situations, and also to get help when they need it. As he told me when we talked on the phone, he said, sometimes you just need to know when you need to go on vacation. So he has a curriculum that we're going to talk to him about here at the School of Global Journalism and Communication for how to prepare students to be safe when they go out, but for us as faculty to also recognize when our students have been subjected to traumatizing events. And because a lot of what we do is domestic and very local in nature, we don't think about how traumatizing some of this stuff can be because we live with it all the time. And as we sit upstairs, we tend to, our philosophy is we go to where the danger is. So when somebody says, oh, can you go, can you do that? Maybe you should stay home. And we're like, what? Stop. And maybe sometimes we need to do that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And also on our panel today is Steve Jackson, who has been a member of the Baltimore County Police Department since 2002. He's been in the Patrol Division and currently serves in the Behavioral Assessment Unit's Mobile Crisis Team. And they respond to calls for service involving citizens in various forms of crises, including suicidal and homicidal people. And he has used his training in mental health response to help people in diversion programs in the criminal justice system. And we talked a lot about being prepared for anything that comes down the pike and how times have changed to some degree. You know, when I started out as a journalist, as I tell the students, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, we were listed in the phone book. We were easy to find. Anybody could walk into a newsroom and meet. There was no security. Certainly employees didn't have badges. So if somebody used to work there and we hadn't seen them in 10 years and they walked in the building, hey, how you doing? Go right on up. We didn't make that kind of distinction. And so while to us, from that generations, feel the weight of security, I think that for a lot of people that's probably the norm. But we still have questions about whether we're as safe as we could be. So I want to open it up to talk about some of the things that we encounter in ways that we can make ourselves more safe. We've had some, besides the incident in Annapolis, we've had problems with TV stations. There's a Fox station in DC, a Fox station here. There were a number of TV stations in the region that ran into problems with somebody coming in and just kind of crashing the party, as it were. Steve, talk a little bit about obvious things that newsrooms ought to consider.
I think the biggest thing, and I heard this before, where it had actually been a question on the last part about when do we take it seriously? When you get the threat. When you get the threat, it has to be taken seriously. When somebody calls out, I mean, it's 2018. We can't just whitewash, it's the guy that comes over, it's no big deal. No, we actually have to take those threats seriously. Especially if it is somebody that's numerous threats, or they have if they have that perceived wrong that's occurred, or it is something that you've had repeated contact with somebody about. And then you have to maintain, we had heard that during the last speaking, that they knew that this individual from from Annapolis was a problem, but everybody had forgotten that he was a problem because he doesn't pop up all the time. So I would say that each one of those, and when you have the person that's coming at the door and he's banging on the door and things are going on, then we know that we need to not just be alert right at that area, that we have to let everyone in the building know that there is an issue at the front, so that they know not to come walking into that situation.
Magnus?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about what you said. I mean, take it seriously. The only way for, let's say, the chief editor, or even as I was talking earlier about HR, that they actually have a quite important role to make sure that all people are healthy, mentally sane, and everything. To give, I mean, maybe worst case, Steve, because when Steve comes into the scene, it's perhaps close to being too late. Maybe.
Can be.
Can be. Okay, sorry. I'll come back to that later. To map trends, we need to have sort of pulse points or reports, etc. So every reporter in a big newsroom, when they are contacted by this strange person, that also has to be, it has to end up somewhere in a log or something, because that then gives a trend that someone like, wait a minute, this person has now called 8 of the reporters 18 times the last month, while we have the same name in our kind of log only a few times. So maybe it's a build-up to something, that there might be a next step coming from this person that we need to react to. And then how to react to that, of course, could be different, that you basically change your routines. You don't come and go to the office at the same time, etc. But you probably have more.
Yeah, trying to explain a little bit more exactly how it works in Baltimore County. So if in Baltimore County, we'll take the incident that an incident would occur, you would have somebody that would call up and be making threats. We are firm believers in contacting the police department. If nothing else, it starts a paper trail. Just to know when that paper, say a suspicious incident, just somebody calls up, makes a threat, we just think that it's warranted enough of concern for us to reach out to the police. That report will come to my unit and the threat management team. We will then do an initial threat assessment on that individual, starting from the moment that it comes across our desk. And then we will work with the agency to make a determination as to what kind of security measures you may need. And we also, if need be, would go out and try, let's say if there was a mental health component to this, we would try to link that person to mental health treatment. But we also could, if needed, take criminal action against the individual if they're conducting criminal activity. If they keep contacting you, harassing you, showing up on the property after you've told them not to, then we have absolutely no problems with going out, getting arrest warrants, doing what we need to do to ensure the safety of everyone at the organization.
We have an email we got earlier today from David Collins at WBAL asking about how to handle public hostility during live shots. He refers to an individual who has interrupted reporters so much that they've had to shut down live reports, and he has followers who do the same. And his contention is that he has a First Amendment right to speak out, but he and his group are interfering with reporters' rights to dispense information. Is there anything that can be done about that? Because he's not directly threatening them, but he is disruptive.
Let you go first on this one.
I would say that that's definitely happening a lot in the countries we are working, and it's usually also linked to, actually physical violence, but definitely prevent the reporters from doing their job. In the case I mentioned about Kenya, where you have actually a bunch of men sexually harass the female reporter to prevent her from actually, covering the election with female perspective on the questions. Just, it's so easy to shut that down, but then they came back as a crowd of women instead to do that. With the other one, you also have to weigh in, Do we need to do this live broadcast at this location? Again, it's an editorial decision that could we have some kind of other scene in the background? Do we really need to stand close to where we actually are accessible to those who are trying to stop us from doing this work? But that's the kind of what I can report from, my centers in the film.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. If there was a way to manipulate the scene to your own benefit, I understand that you might want to get the backdrop, you might want to get the thing, but if it's the same person you're dealing with repeatedly who's coming out there and you see him walking across the street, and we're going to move. Because you know he's already going to do it. If there's a way to move to a different area to get other people, if there's already people there, use them as your backdrop to keep him from getting into you. Or for lack of a better term, put other reporters between you and that individual that's constantly coming to you as well. Because then he's being broadcast on other medias or whatever, or he might get tied into them as opposed to you're the one particular target. And then again, I would try and document as much as you can, make sure that your editors know and you sit down, hey, this is this one individual that we keep having problems with over and over and over again. What should we do? What do you suggest? Make sure you get that group approach in. And then again, if it comes into a point where you think that there is an issue where you need police involvement, absolutely get in contact with them.
When I was a young reporter, I had a couple of stalking incidents, but for a while, I would have a security escort to my car after work every day. And so that can last for a while, and then you don't hear from the person. I never felt completely comfortable after that because I thought, well, he could wait them out. How do you talked a little bit about this, Magnus, but either of you, are there particular things that we as reporters should be doing to ensure that we're protected, just as a matter of routine? Because now it's really easy for somebody out of nowhere to come up and confront you. I have a son who's a sports writer, and he was going to his car after a game one day, and some people came up to him. Well, one guy came up to him and said, "Are you Tony Jones?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, all of a sudden, all these folks came up from behind cars and behind trees and bushes because they were parents who were upset that he wasn't writing about their sons for this high school baseball team, but he had written a lot about this pitcher who pretty much single-handedly carried the team on his back. If it hadn't been for this kid's pitching, they probably wouldn't have won at all. And parents were angry. They were saying, well, if you don't write about my kid, he's not going to get a scholarship to college. And it was crazy. They had his phone number. They would call the house. They'd wake the baby. It was just insane kind of stuff. And you don't see that coming. You're going to get in your car. How do you look around? How do you prepare for the possibility without getting overly paranoid that you're going to always be confronting somebody?
Yeah.
You start? You want me to start this one? I can start it. It's look. If we look at this as like a workplace violence incident and things that could occur, we can't go around closing the doors, living in just little steel boxes. We always have to kind of pay attention to what's going on around us. When you're leaving at work at the end of the day, it's not my face on my phone, text messaging people on my social media accounts because I haven't been at it at work. We have to pay attention to our surroundings. Don't walk into places or things that it would be really hard pressed unless you were distracted to not notice an entire group of people hiding behind cars. Something, either you're picking up on a little bit of some little hairs on the back of your neck, something doesn't feel right. Absolutely pay attention to those things. And then when you are going out, if you do feel there's an issue, absolutely get security to come out with you. Like he was saying with the female reporters that were getting together, strengthen numbers. Everybody can go out at one time. Don't let yourself get isolated. And if you think there's a problem, that's when you really need to escalate. Head on the swivel, paying attention to what's going on all the time. So.
No, the really tricky part is, let's say that if you actually have a designated security person with you, etc. When to decide that to stop? What sort of boxes needs to be ticked for that extra security measure to stop? It's not a pleasant decision to take, I guess. But I would say that, as you also said, the early warning systems not necessarily always technical capacity, etc. It's also, I mean, like there's something that's going on that you are not comfortable with, because you as a human being and your body, you will sometimes react to things that you actually should listen to and avoid getting into. Just wait, perhaps bring someone with you. But it's taking the decision to take away a person's extra security layer. That's have to be very careful. But it's also with many of the news outlets I work with, it's a funding issue. I mean, how long are they going to provide this extra security for a reporter that's being harassed, for example? Yeah, it's a tough decision.
And then when in terms of security, I mean, most of us work places where we have to have ID. There's usually some sort of check when you come in. You either got to swipe in if you're going in a back door, you got to meet security when you come into the building. There seem to be all these things in place, but it doesn't seem to stop somebody who is intent on coming at you. So how do you prepare? What should be done? I mean, you take we're a public institution. This is a very porous campus. So folks can get on this, and we have had incidents in the past where somebody has come and confronted students or gone after staffers, and you know, we've had students robbed in the parking lot right outside the gate of this side of campus. I mean, you know, what kinds of things should we be doing to ensure greater safety?
So it's also, sure, I mean, I would say that if there is really a person or a group extremely dedicated and perhaps also have the resources to do something really bad, I'm afraid that they will most likely also try to do it. But then if they're successful or not, that can be just speculated about. But the proactive parts is, to me and the people we are training, that's the most important part, that we teach journalists to become their own risk management advisors. So they make informed decisions. How should I do this job? Should I really go all the way up and confront the demonstration, or should I find other ways to do it? When everything goes wrong, when shit really is splattered all over the fan, etc., then you have to have, the kind of reactive parts. So if something happens at this campus, well, all the early warning system, etc., the logbook of this person harassing this campus, well, it failed. So then we go into the reactive mode, and that could be that, well, you have a lockdown system at the campus to limit the damage. There might be someone will be hurt and injured, but you limit the damage by having a lockdown procedure, perhaps.
No, absolutely. Training is the biggest key, and even in ours, it's 50% of the workload that we do is going out and training people on what to look for, what to see, what to do. If you do not develop a mental pathway about what to do if something terrible goes wrong, you will just go into your most primitive fight or flight, and that's it. You will forget how to get out of a room. You won't think about barricading rooms. You wouldn't think about where to go. You will become, for lack of a better term, a lemming. You will go in, you will go try and go out the exact same door you walk through, and that's all you will think about. So if you think about it, when we were in grade school, we all had fire drills. It's 2018, now we have active shooter drills, and we have to have active shooter drills. And if you're not doing active shooter drills in your workplace, in your school, in your place of worship, whatever, then you're remiss. And that whole organization should be doing those, because they can happen. So that would probably be ours. I mean, even all of our Baltimore County schools now are doing ALICE training from K through 12. So they're doing ALICE training on what to do.
What about, you know, somebody raised a question earlier about the cost of adding security measures. And I imagine some of you come from real small operations where budgets are really tight, and that's a real consideration, you know, for a larger organization like WBAL-TV or like The Sun or some other places. You know, they probably have the money, their insurance probably covers a lot of stuff, so they can make things happen. But if you're a small circulation newspaper, say maybe 8 to 10,000, you know, that can get costly, can't it? Or are there other things that can be done?
I would say that the best security resource that you guys have is sitting in this room. You guys are the eyes, the ears of the organization. You would be the ones that would be getting the information that there could be somebody. You're the one walking in and out of the door every day. You're the one who opens the door and lets somebody in that's not supposed to be coming into your office. Not paying attention to what's going on. You guys are your own best security at this point. It's just like, for lack of a better term, is it better to kind of wait on the police to show up, or kind of not put yourself in a position that you needed the police in the first place?
Yeah. I worked as a journalist many years ago, and I mean, eventually, of course, I ended up working as a freelancer. That didn't make me rich, but so it's, I mean, but that's also the reality. So how did I pay for my risk management trainings, etc.? Well, I didn't, because I didn't take the risk management trainings. But of course, what I see now, 20 years later, is that there are a lot more initiatives, international initiatives, where they actually provide resources to freelance journalists, for example. And I can provide a list perhaps to you later. If there's a mailing system or something, I can share those resources, where actually as a freelancer can apply to take a risk management training, for example, usually at no cost. And of course, it's also in my interest, because as freelancer, you have a tendency to visit the countries where I work, and the journalists I train locally, they have a tendency to work as your fixers. So if both of these could be equally well trained, we'll be safe.
That's a good point. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on like what constitutes a threat? I think we get, everyone in the industry probably gets a lot of feedback on stories, and what drives us so much as journalists is the conversation with the community in town. But at what point should we say this maybe is the next level, or this is more than just a comment to the story? It's something that we should be concerned about.
I think, just in my professional opinion, if you have to ask that question about that statement that's being made to you, then it's most likely a threat. If you go, is this a threat? You're trying to convince yourself that it's not a threat. So that would just be my personal opinion. And then if you look at it and go, ask someone else too.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, get an opinion. And I mean, I will say, if you guys are in Baltimore County, you guys have the absolute ability to reach out to us. And if you think it's a threat, float it past us. We'll look at it, and we'll look into all the background and everything else that you might not have access to. And we'll give you our opinion as well. And we work for coffee. We love coffee. We're cops. We just drink coffee.
No Dunkin'?
No.
Actually, Steve, if you're not in Baltimore County, so you have people from the city, from Western Maryland, from Wycomico, from Delaware.
Now,
What do you do?
so I would suggest reaching out to, if you're in Baltimore City, I'm not gonna lie, there's absolutely no point in calling your local precinct. None. Find out who the investigative unit is for that, or the intelligence unit, or your detective units for your smaller departments that you're working with, and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what we have. It's 2018. If we have who would we call? Who would we contact? Now, I did float this with my supervisors when we left, before we left. So, and I will throw this out there to everybody that's sitting in here. If your organization is looking for training on workplace violence, de-escalation, home visit safety, anything that you're hearing us talk about up here today, reach out to us at Baltimore County Police Department. We will come to you. We will make it happen, because we're reaching out to you and giving this training. We are mandated that this is supposed to be our thing. Because you guys have asked us for help, we will come out and help you as well. It's not going to be as completely specific as what Magnus could offer you, but it is more along the lines of, hey, you have a workplace, the active shooter response, what to do in those situations. And like we've helped with Sinclair, we've helped with the Dundalk Eagle, we've been over there, and some of the bigger places. We've designed some pretty big programs, so we would be more than welcome, free of charge, to come out. Just, sometimes scheduling becomes an issue, because we're two guys for, a lot of people. So.
Yes, sir.
We had a situation, say, 2 weeks ago. I've been in this business a long time, and I really haven't had this. We sent a reporter to cover a viewing for a teenager who was killed running to catch his school bus. It was up in Harford County,
Okay.
northeastern Maryland. We've done this on numerous occasions when they've had services, viewings. Reporter called up the funeral home, got permission, was told where to be. I'm assuming, because it's always been our procedure, that they would check with the family before they. So sometimes, normally we would try to send a photographer, but it was a Saturday, a photographer was not available. And I do work for the Baltimore Sun Media Group, but we don't have unlimited resources. And apparently he got up there and he was standing where he was told he could be, and he was trying to talk to people. Those people didn't want to talk to him, but at some point, some teenagers came over and basically said, "Get out of here." And he didn't go at first, and then the leader of this group, and apparently they were wearing some kind of thing that signified they were the Sunflower Gang from northern Harford County. If you're not familiar with it, I would classify it as a very strong Trump country. So, I mean, this person was very insistent, so he left. He's an older fellow, but he's not big, not an assuming guy or a guy. I think if our regular photographer had been there, he's from the neighborhood, big and kind of good at diffusing situations. It might not have happened, but it's given me a lot of concern. We're always sending people to knock on doors. When people get arrested, when they have, a death, violent death, seems to be particularly an obsession with some of our higher up editors. First of all, you go on the property, I guess you're not trespassing until they tell you to leave, but it's my reason for coming here, David. It's certainly given me a lot more thought about sending people out, sending them out alone, but even sending them out in pairs. Sam Davis in opening remarks mentioned the shooting in Aberdeen. Our people were the first ones on the scene, 3 of them. But they all got there at different times. Nobody knew for sure because the police weren't saying the shooter was down. Apparently they were, but we didn't know that. The Sun had another photographer and 3 other people from their shop run out there. So, I mean, I don't know how much we're learning. I guess we're learning on the fly maybe, but I would like to know, how would you handle a situation where you send somebody out in the community, not thinking they're going to get confronted, but this is, I think, this is going to happen more and more, like everybody's said today.
I can maybe partly give my view on this, because this is also, I mean, what I meant about the way we decide to present stories and the news. We need to have a live footage, video clip from this ceremony or whatever it was. But it's also, maybe it's because this is how we always done it. So that's why we do send a reporter out to do this. So at the same time, as you mentioned, it's 2018, climate changed, situation changed out there. So maybe I can give an example from El Salvador, where there was a photographer that eventually we had to do an emergency support to him to evacuate him from San Salvador. He was constantly being sent out to cover the different murders. And of course the gang saw him all the time and they thought you were taking a picture of me. So eventually we had to take him away therefore. But then of course the editors, they still need these photos, bodies laying in the grass somewhere. So they send another photographer. And what happened? We have to, of course, invest in emergency support for this photographer 6 months later to evacuate him away from San Salvador. We needed to actually train the editors that maybe you should accept the change, that you don't need these perhaps bodies laying in the grass anymore, and sort of a little bit blurry with the gang in the background. So, but of course it's really difficult also to change the way we present news. So that's one thing. I mean, why are this type of footage needed? That's to instead approach the decision makers that send the people out on these jobs, that maybe do it differently.
I would agree. I think we come into the point of, what's more important, getting the story or the safety of the people that we're sending out. I mean, it almost has to be hey, we'd really like you to get that shot, but we need you to know that if you can't get that shot, we're more worried about your safety, and then you do some journalism afterwards. You may have to get a little more creative with your shots or something afterwards. But I know that's a tough sell as you go higher up, because you need more to get anyone's attention anymore is the problem. I think that's, but I don't know how to change that. And I don't know that it will change. And as it was stated before, the current climate towards any media source, depending on which side you're on, is terrible. So I don't know how to change it. I would just say that I am a firm believer in two going if they can, so that one can watch the other one's back or whatever. That's just awesome. But I think each case is going to have to dictate itself.
Let me throw something up to you and then share.
Sure. What level of identification, like how clearly should you mark yourself as a member of the press? Like personally, I generally only like to identify myself when I'm in public when I need to. You know what I mean? Like I don't really like wearing badges or anything that would identify me until I need to talk to someone and say I work for so and so. Can you talk or like whatever? I mean, what would you recommend? Wearing? Do you have your badge around your neck? I mean, I don't know. Do you have your badge?
Well, no, actually, and that it's like a huge debate among police. When they look at me, they're like, "Why do you wear your badge around your neck? You're not wearing body armor." Because honestly, I wear my badge around my neck because I don't want another cop to shoot me because I have a gun on. I'm not gonna lie. But seriously, I think that the situation is going to dictate itself. Depending on who you work for, depending on what you're covering or what's going on, it may be times you don't want to throw out that you're a member of the press. Other times it may be beneficial if you're doing something, let's say if it's at a protest or something like that, if you think it's more beneficial for both sides to know that you're not trying to take photos of people just for the police department, or that you're just trying to take bad pictures of the police department, letting the police know that you are a member of the press and not the people that are part of the other side, it may be more beneficial to you at that point.
I agree. I mean, you have to choose the opportunities when to be perhaps extremely visible, because that gives you an extra security layer. And as you prefer to do, perhaps be more blend in. Yeah.
Professor Shippen and Professor Cabrera.
I want to complicate it a little bit more.
Ooh, love those.
We're at a place in this country now where white people who are nervous about black people easily call the police because they're suspicious of their just existence. Barbecuing, being at the pool, being in the park, we've seen all these stories.
Yes, ma'am.
What do we tell black journalists, particularly black male journalists, when they're going out to report? How can they be safe as they go out and do their work?
Depending on where they're going, again, this may come back to his question of, do I have my credentials out? Am I wearing something that identifies me as the press? Because this has become this epidemic of, for lack of a better term, people, I wanted to say idiots, calling on human beings that are just in an area based on their skin color. But that might be something that you want to do. And just for them, paying attention to what's going on as well. You know, that person that's confronting them, then that may be the point to come out and listen, I'm a journalist, you know, I'm out here, I'm covering the story, instead of becoming argumentative and becoming part of the issue ourselves, because sometimes you see that as well. Don't bite into it. I know it's hard. That's one of the things when we do our training. The biggest thing that I tell anybody sitting in this room is figure out what your hot button is. Figure out what somebody can say to you to bite you into that conversation, because now you're not covering the story, you are the story. So just make sure that, you know, they know they're prepared for anybody in the world to say that thing to them, so they can just act towards it, not react towards it.
Years ago, there was in DC, a group that met monthly of PIAs from police departments and medical editors and like. Does that still exist, and do you in that group do any training for threat assessment and safety deterrence?
I personally do not. I honestly, I do not know the answer to that question as to whether or not they still do. That would be a question for my police information officer in Baltimore County, and I can gladly provide you guys with that contact information to find out if it still does. If it is something that they still do, and if you would like to have that training, I will be your guy. I will be there. I will tell you that if it's still going on. If it's not going on, then and you want to reach out to them, then I will try and facilitate getting that training for you.
Let me throw out.
Also, what happened, we never included students, which is what we're really going in terms of having students a part of that professional organization while they're studying.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer honestly, I don't understand why we don't include students for talking about things such as school violence and school shooting. It's them that it affects. Why are we making the decisions? I think they should be part of it. I mean, they're the people that see the threats more than we do. They're the ones that get the first contact to social media. Why aren't they the ones that are on the committees with us?
There's a sort of an elephant in the room, if you will, and I'm glad Professor Shipp brought up her question. When we started out in the industry, you got certain or didn't get certain assignments because of race or gender or somebody deciding that you weren't the one that ought to go to a certain neighborhood because you look too preppy, but I'm gonna send Magnus because he looks like he'll fit in the hood. Mm-hmm. So are we getting back to that stage? Are you all making decisions, those of you who are editors, about who gets to go on an assignment? You're never going to say it because you don't want to get sued for bias, but do you think about that? Are you making decisions saying, I don't think I'm going to send her over there, or maybe we shouldn't send him, or we're going to send more than one person? Do you make those kinds of decisions anymore?
I don't have any people of color anymore, but it came up on occasion. The last person we had, a young woman, because we live in a pretty racially polarized area. And we've been fighting this as long as I've been there. But it came up on occasion, and normally what we would say to her, this is the situation, and we didn't have the security focus we have now. Would you feel concerned about this? And I think for the most part, she was from the city, and I think she did all the assignments. I don't, it's been a few years. I was a little surprised when we didn't have any say in it. She was moved to our paper in Carroll County, and the first assignment they gave her was covering Taunton County. Oh, it's pretty far out there from where she lived, but she didn't stay very long. I think she got a better job working for the city, so I don't know. But yeah, that's a concern. It might be more of a concern now. I mean, at my age, I wouldn't be concerned if somebody said, you have to run out to Cherry Hill or someplace and cover the story. Been there, done that, but maybe in this day and age with younger people, it has to be a consideration. I don't know.
Saw a lot of heads nodding.
I mean, it is like you were just saying. Are you gonna send a 19-year-old African American male into this really prevalent Trump community, all Caucasians, and say, "Hey, we need you to do this interview. Good luck." I mean,
Well, if I sent a white guy up there and he got it, I probably would have to think about it.
I mean, that's. I mean, are we back at that point? And then how do we fix that? How do we fix that? And then I mean, no matter how it gets reported, one side's going to make it look like it's horrible towards the other side, and the other side makes it. It's just right in the middle. Somewhere in the middle, I guess anymore.
I have a person who's done a lot of photography for us over the years. He's African American, doesn't work for us, but he's, well known in parts of the community. But if we're in a pinch and we need something, he'll go. And he's older than I am, so I guess people aren't going to perceive, oh, this guy's here to cause trouble. So he wears an ID, who he is, and everything. All our people do when they're out in the field. But still, you have to consider. I'm more attuned now to the safety issues since this thing came up. I'm the one that assigned the guy to go. And I don't want to send somebody out and put them in harm's way. Really don't. Not worth it to me at this point.
I mean, that honestly would be a great question for the people you're teaching. It'd be a great question for the people they're teaching. What do they think about it, and what do they think are ways they could change that? I mean, honestly, we're just the old folks at this point.
Well, Magnus talked a little bit earlier about the curriculum he designed, and he and I talked a little bit yesterday on the phone about sort of the global issues, because we are a school of global journalism and communication, but that certainly cultural differences in how we approach people. And I think that there's not a standard that applies across the board anymore, if that ever really existed, when reporters go out into the field, and how we handle questions from people in the community when they call to complain, or when we send people beyond the confines of the community we know well. What do you teach people? What are you telling them, or what does the curriculum suggest that we do to ameliorate some of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the previous question was really super interesting. So I would love to hear more about that in a class or something. But because it's actually linked to kind of using the smart side of cultural awareness and embed that into your risk management practices. Sure, we're talking about being sued and everything, but if I need to get a story, or if I need to get a job done, I need to also tailor the profile of the team that is going to do this. So I would definitely use all available resources, including the color of my skin, or the color of the skin of the team, to make this happen. The curriculum as such, I mentioned that all my teams, they are local teams, they speak the local language, they are parts of these different clans or ethnicities, etc., just to build this acceptance, to be allowed to train journalists. Not that, sure, they will listen perhaps, but we need to go that extra step, because we do have them for 5 days, small groups, 10 to 12 people. It's like a very, I wouldn't call it actually, I'm leaning towards calling it less and less kind of safety training. It's almost like a team building because the output of our safety trainings is actually, we have built a solidarity network that will continue to cooperate and support each other. And that is perhaps also, I was thinking about that earlier, that I don't know, I mean, after this shooting you had here, if there's more cooperation between the different outlets, I mean, TV, radio, or newspaper, that they cooperate more in sharing information or sharing lessons learned, etc. Because one example from Sweden, it had to be a journalist, Swedish journalist killed in Afghanistan to make the big media outlets in Sweden to actually start cooperating and share risk assessments, etc. Previously, it was like they were working separately, but now they don't cooperate on the stories, of course, but they share the risk assessments for different regions of the world. So back to the curriculum, it's being used. This is what we have here, the printed version I handed out to at least you guys. That is kind of the neutral, colorless version. All my centers, they have localized this to fit their target audience, and that would be the same here. I mean, if you extract parts of that into your training, then you need to localize the content.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So do you have any tips on how to de-escalate a situation? If you find yourself with that belligerent person that someone talked about earlier, and you're maybe you're surprised that you have that situation or whatnot. Do you have specific tips on how to de-escalate it?
You want to jump in first? Oh, great.
I can talk about
I think, like I said, being honest with yourself about what your hot button is. Don't get sucked into an argument. There's no point in getting into a screaming match. In this limited block, it's kind of hard to go over like an entire de-escalation class. But the biggest thing that I could say is don't become part of the argument. If that person is getting belligerent, you're having that conversation with them. There's generally if it's over the telephone, there's no point in continuing the conversation if you can end it. If it's in person, then it's most likely time to end the conversation as well. Because as he's saying with risk assessment, every moment that you're standing there with that human, you're not only gathering the information for the story, you have to do a constant risk assessment as they're escalating as to what the danger level is for me. And the easiest way to get out of that danger level is to end the conversation and walk away. Pack up your stuff, do what you got to do. We use excuses. My partner and I, we're still two pretty big guys, but we may get into an situation in the interview in someone's house, and it may get escalated. And it may not be that we're there to arrest them, but my partner will look at me and he'll be like, hey man, we got to go get that Form 18 out of the car. There is no such form in the police department. It is a moment for us to take a break from the situation, let them take a break, walk out there, frizzum, walk back in. And that is actually, if you can take that cool down period, it is a good thing. Hey, I got to get something out of the car. We ran out of tape. You don't use that kind of video equipment anymore, but I ran out of tape. My batteries died in my whatever you need to do. Sometimes taking a break can actually help calm both sides down.
There are times when trying to walk away or get out of the situation escalates or drives the other person to escalate. What do you do then?
For lack of a better term, be prepared to run. If it's at the point where it's that escalated and you're trying to leave and now that person has become aggressive, then it's kind of an all bets are off thing. You had better know what your plan was before you got there. Am I going to go to my car? And once I get to the car, who am I going to notify? What's the safest way out of this room? Have I let them lead the conversation while I'm in there so that I'm all the way in the back of their house, or am I closer to the front exit of it? Do I know how to get out of their house? That kind of stuff. You should be constantly thinking about, how do I get out? How can I get out of here? Where could I hide in here if I had to? And worst comes to worst, what can I use to defend myself that's within easy reach?
So a little bit also perhaps to slow down your work to allow we were talking about risk assessment, but we can also slow down the work so you actually have time to talk to each other. So it's not only, okay, yeah, he answered, he's expecting you in his home. Okay, wait a minute. Are we going into his home? So there's a time to talk about it before you actually stand inside. Yeah. instead of another person's home, which you don't know anything about. But that's also, it goes back to decision makers and editors and getting a profit out of running a newspaper, for example. That there's a constant push of, getting the story done quickly.
What are some of the real, on a real basic level, things that we tend to do or not do that make us vulnerable in terms of, I mentioned earlier, most of us come to work, we have ID cards. If you want to get in the parking lot out of here, you got to swipe into the lot or have somebody come in.
By the way.
Yes.
Yeah, I got in your parking lot.
It's been known to happen. And so, exactly, but that kind of thing. What are some of the things, not just us here at the university, but for our, for the member papers here or news organizations that have folks coming in and out to transact business? It's not always news. It can be, circulation. It can be advertising. I worked at a paper once where this guy came in and he would bring ads to the paper all the time. Well, he had been dating one of the saleswomen and they broke up. And they waved him in and he went in the back and he had taken nude photos of the woman and made a bunch of photocopies and left them on the desks of all her colleagues. And then he tried to come back later in the day to confront her. Well, of course, security stopped him then, but the embarrassing stuff had already been spread around the office. So how do you keep somebody like that? If you've been working with this guy for years, do you just let him in, or do you make him, every time he comes, go through the security protocol? What are some of the things that we ought to be thinking about?
We just keep deferring to each other on this one. Man, where's the other guy? In that particular situation, and domestics are a huge part of our caseload, they really are. Especially now, domestics have become really huge in the workplace, so let's take it as a workplace. When we do our workplace violence prevention training, the biggest thing that we talk to people about is about reporting incidents that have occurred, especially with domestics. You may change the boyfriend, change the lock, change the house, change your social security number, change your social media, change everything else, but the one thing you don't change is where you go to work every day, because we all need money. If you're having that kind of thing, we have to foster amongst our employees them to feel trusted enough in management, in their supervisors, in their HR, to look at them and say, I'm having a problem in my personal life and I'm afraid it may show up at work. And then management or whatever to make those steps to say, okay, well, we know it's this individual that was coming for circulation and here's his photo and this person has to go through these things. And especially if they go to the point to get a protective order. And I won't say the name of the business, but I did a presentation in front of 700 employees. There were 75 supervisors in the room, and their company policy is to, if you have a protective order, that you must report it to a supervisor. So with all the supervisors in the room, I asked the question, how many people have had a protective order and reported it to a supervisor? 3 people raised their hand. I made the supervisors leave the auditorium, ask the same question. 150 people raised their hand that they had had protective orders and never told their supervisors. If you're playing, for lack of a better term, Russian roulette with a domestic showing up at the front door, those odds just increased, exponentially. So, I think the fostering that the employees know that they can come and let management know that they're having an issue and providing training for them to know what to do. But I would say, yes, you need to have that individual go through security protocol every time.
Yeah, it's usually not the technique that is a limitation. It's us as human beings that we get lazy, or it's uncomfortable to ask someone that is coming after you when the door is open, you open it with your card. It's uncomfortable to ask if someone comes directly after, just tag along and sort of like, wait a minute, who are you? We usually just let them in. So it's the human factor, perhaps.
Any last questions? All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists for their knowledge and help today, and offers of help, which now that you have said it and said it publicly on the
Yeah,
record,
I'm done.
you're both on the hook here at Morgan, so we'll be in touch.
I feel like we'll be taking you up on your offers as well. So thank you to Jackie and our panelists, and we're actually ahead of schedule, that never happens. And so we are, this was the end of our panel. I thank you guys so much for coming out. Hope it was helpful, and we'll see you again soon.